you.
We're all good here.
Thank you so much for inviting us here today to be able to chat with you about how our community activity is addressing language deprivation and the lack of resources. So we will address language deprivation. First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Sarah Honigfeld, and I am the Regional Director at the Gallaudet Center for Early Intervention and part of the networking outreach team for REAL, the Regional Early Acquisition of Language. Melissa?
Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here today. My name is Melissa Mouse-Kuhn, and I am the founder and director of Motion Light Lab and the chair leading the Declare effort. I'm also a mother of a deaf child. So it's really deep in my heart, everything. I wear many hats.
Briefly, we're just going to discuss what we're going to be covering today. We'll be with you for about an hour today. There are a few different topics we'll be covering. The Beacon Center for the National EDDI program, they'll be involved today. Unfortunately, we were hoping they could present with us, but they won't be able to present. So I'll be covering part of their presentation. So Beacon, REAL, and Declare are all the topics that we'll cover today, which is quite exciting. And then at the end of this time together, there will be time for question and answer. Before we really dive into the community action, I do want to step back a bit and make sure that we share common language under the title of language deprivation. And I know that you may be seeing that I've used several different signs and what those meanings are. So I briefly want to cover that today. So this is a fundamental concept that the community has really started discussing to make sure that we are using the same terminology when we talk about language acquisition and language deprivation and what these things mean. Dr. Matt Hall in 2020 established a literary review of multiple articles, research, publications in regards to language deprivation. And through that analysis, he looked at the different terms that were out there for language deprivation and found 4 different definitions associated with that term. Whether it be in research, publications, or literature, there were these 4 different definitions. So we looked at these definitions and really determined what we mean when we are establishing resources, programs, what the meaning is so that we can address it. So I will go over those 4 different meanings and the signs that can be used so you can differentiate what we're really specifically talking about in regards to this topic. The first one was about intent. So intentionally depriving someone of language. And that looks at fault of the parents or professionals. Typically, that is the most common use or meaning of the term, that it was an intentional deprivation of language, that someone wanted this child to suffer without language. However, I do want to ask each of you, is there any family out there that you know truly deep within their heart, their intent was to deprive their child of language? Is there anyone that can think of a family like that? In my 15 years in this field, I have never met a family who intentionally tried to deprive or diminish their child by withholding language. Interestingly enough, that's the most commonly used definition, but it's rare that it's the actual cause of language deprivation. So it's probably not the most accurate term when we're talking about language deprivation. Another definition for deprivation is environmental. So what's available to a child in their environment on a daily basis, both in regards to their experiences, what they've been exposed to, and what they have access to auditorily or visually. When we look at those 2 areas, that is impacted by the environment. So the sign that we're using is language deprivation, showing the lack of things within the environment, whether it may be access to the community, if they're in a rural area and there's not a large deaf community, being raised around or within a community that has deaf people and deaf culture. That is a form of deprivation, but it's not to deprive intentionally. The next is looking at proficiency in regards to a child's innate skills. When they acquire language, when they acquire information, the fluency to be able to retain and express themselves through language and to acquire information. So that has a large impact on the possibility of language deprivation. That type of language deprivation is not intentional. It's their ability to acquire language. It may be that they have an additional disability. There could be other factors that are impacting the child and their ability to acquire language beyond what we would expect for their age. Then the other area is developmentally. Oftentimes we talk about language deprivation. We really are talking about what happened as a result of that deprivation and the type of deprivation, which causes cognitive delays, language delays, emotional, social delays, mental health issues, and additional health needs and lack of access to resources. So that is a result of not having access to language at an early age. So it's important that we look at, are we talking about the early stages, which are most critical in a child's life, and the results and impacts of that lack of access later in life, which causes them to face a whole host of issues. So we want to be clear about language deprivation, whether it's contextual, it's intentional, or it's lack of access. So that research shows that it's all systemic. It is systemic barriers that cause these barriers to language, to services, to resources. When we think about even insurance, not covering ASL services, however, speech language therapy services are covered, which is also a barrier. There's medical access that families may be looking for particular services, but the system is not designed to support them for preventative care, but more reactive care. So looking at those systemic barriers. And I point this out because when we are being active as a community, we need to really understand that. So with that leads to the Beacon organization, the Beacon Center that I'd like to talk about. Unless, Melissa, you have something you'd like to add?
I think you really hit everything accurately. Well, I guess one thing to add. Let me explain more. I'll explain a little bit more once I get into Declare work that we've been doing. But to make changes that really build toward movement, we don't want to be in a position where we are reactive to the problem and that it's cyclical, but that we get ahead of the problem and investigate what is causing that problem and then resolve that so that we can then be more proactive and not just reactive to issues that come to light. So when we have these programs, deaf programs, so for example, if there's an issue or a difficulty such as environmental language deprivation, we can't really just be responding to certain things that come up. We have to really deeper and understand what is the cause of this effect. So I think that's really why it's such vital work. That's what I wanted to add.
Thank you. So the National Beacon Center at Gallaudet University is led by Dr. Christina Badamula and then also Dr. Bobby Joe Kite. And they are the director and assistant director of that program. And they are faculty within the education department at Gallaudet University. So now I'll give you just a moment to review this slide. So the Beacon Center is one of 3 national federally funded grants through the Department of Health and Resources, Human Resources Services Administration, excuse me, HRSA. It's a federal agency under Children and Maternal Health Bureau. So HRSA oversees the Beacon, which again is one of 3 centers. Beacon's primary role is to support EDDI coordinators in their work amongst states and territories, and that is their primary and only goal. They support by means of assistive technology, consultation, sharing of resources, establishing work groups to help EDDI coordinators identify gaps within their state, systemic gaps. The goal is to be able to provide support birth to 3 years of age only. Anyone older than 3 years of age is not within the scope of this program. And take a look at the slide. Because this federal grant is awarded in 5-year cycles, it was received in 2024 and it should be completed in 2029. The Beacon Center, along with 2 other national EDDI organizations have, or grants, excuse me, have goals. The Beacon Center particularly is working within the next, 4 years. And the first goal is to be able to support infants at 1, 3, and 6 months. And if you want to look at the Joint Commission on Infant Hearing, JCIH, they published something back in, I believe, 2015 that establishes screenings for hearing exams for children at 1 month. At 3 months, those infants who have been referred for more information must be receiving audiological testing to identify whether they are deaf, hard of hearing, or can hear within the 3-month mark. And then at 6 months, any infant who has been identified through that screening is to be enrolled and receive early intervention services within their area. So that is the 136 rule, that all states and territories would be able to meet these goals within their state. That's Beacon's primary goal. Their second goal is to improve upon partnerships between C, which is early intervention agencies within the state, and then EDDI, and making that connection, make sure there's shared information and supports, looking at gaps, working together. And the final goal is to provide evidence-based research that supports resources and information with language acquisition for all deaf children birth to 3 years of age. This third goal is a new goal on this federal cycle, and it's very exciting to see. I've mentioned several times 3 national EDDI grants. This is the list of the other 2. The first is the Family Leadership and Language Learning, FL3, through the Leadership Center. Hands and Voices National Team works with that. And then the Provider Education Center, run by the American Academy of Pediatrics. So the Beacon Center at Gallaudet has worked to create National EDDI Network, and those 3 organizations are working jointly with all the states, with EDDI coordinators, with family leaders, and pediatricians and medical providers to collaborate and make sure that we're providing high quality services for all families with young, deaf, and hard of hearing children from birth to 3. One of the new goals for Beacon as part of this work will be to establish language acquisition work group. This work group will identify suggested assessments or recommended assessments, milestones, strategies, so that those assessments can be used to document achievement for deaf and hard of hearing children from birth to 3 years of age. So we're really making a lot of progress, and we're excited to see what they'll come up with. Go ahead and take a moment to read the slide. Christy and her colleagues and myself have been emphasizing with this group that they need to reach out to their EDI coordinator and invite them into their schools and programs and have conversations so that you know the EDI coordinator and that they understand your school and your program. If they need additional information about language acquisition, see what you can do to provide support to that EDI coordinator. If the EDI coordinator is unsure, they can reach out to the Beacon Center to get consultation, support, resources, etc. And that's the opportunity for them then in turn to support the EDI coordinator. The Beacon Center is asking each of you to reach out within your state to your EDI coordinator to build that relationship, because the more that deaf schools, the deaf community can get involved at this level, we will build a system that works for everyone. There's the contact information for Beacon. One thing I'd like to mention about the Beacon Center that I really want to highlight, it is a federal grant through HRSA, and it is a 5-year cycle. Now we'll go on to discussing REAL, and I am here to represent this organization.
Carrie, I'll take over. So our mission at REAL is wanting to connect deaf and hard of hearing children birth to 3 with their communities, basically providing that language, that socialization, which is so critical for their development. The 3 areas that we really want to address through REAL is family engagement, supporting those families, providing professional training and consulting connections, technology that will help with that, and then community connections, asking experts and those key community members for resources and support, coaching and consulting, and connecting outside of just the home into the community. So that's part of our mission at REAL. Now, in our work, we have 3 main audiences that we want to engage. Families, providing ASL classes, are developing children's books for children birth to 3 in ASL and English, being able to provide resources about language acquisition with our family resource package, our packet. And then also engaging with early intervention, getting those young deaf, hard of hearing children that early exposure through presentations, consulting, coaching, using experts within the community. So using those professionals. And then also another audience is the medical community, those service providers within the medical setting, giving them education, awareness, empowerment, sharing appropriate resources, how to connect with the community, and really disseminate correct, accurate information, especially for those that are meeting a family for the first time, and that family is with their first child that was identified as deaf. So we really focus on those 3 main audiences and providing the best possible resource and connections. We use a connections model, which means we value the ability to build relationships within each region and then have that network connect and expand, providing those resources, sharing those resources, and create a really strong ecosystem within each region and then branching out. More information about our funding source for the REAL program is we are Congress appropriated funding. So we receive those funds from Congress to do this work. I'm just going to throw out some statistics I'm sure you already know, but this is really the core of why we do what we do. We know that 90% of the brain is developed by age 5. We know that up to 96% of deaf babies are born to non-signing parents. Maybe they don't know about deaf culture. They don't know about how to acquire sign language. They haven't been exposed to that and are unaware. early access. We know that we have to deliver this information and share the information that access to ASL as early as possible is actually better and more beneficial than those that will develop it later on. So our work thus far, Melissa and I have been working on a lot of things, especially the bilingual bookshelf app, making signed book stories. Our goal is to have around 120 books that we will be able to release in ASL, and then hopefully up to about 30 storytelling, art, illustrated, everything from the deaf community, 30 books that originate from the deaf community for the deaf community. And then also having real families. So real families that connect with the real centers, then having access to this for free. Always having books that are available in sign language is free. But in order to use certain aspects or features, it would have to be a paid program for the deaf community, but free for the real families. We also have family retreats. We provide access to ASL classes for the families at no cost. And there's a variety of different ASL instructors. So, for example, ASDC classes, ASL Spring, ASL Shop. We have agreements with all of those entities to provide ASL services for our families at no cost. The families will connect up to that through the Real Center. And then we do send a box or a packet to each family. And it's a kit that includes so much resources, books, fun things and activities to support language acquisition, apps and codes for different free things or free features. It is an amazing kit that we send out to our families. Very cool that we are able to do that for them. And then hopefully releasing the resources for family education, being able to provide various resources about the journey of a deaf individual's life. I'm not the only one. How do I find my support net? Having that manual or that educational guidebook available for families. And then regional conference, as well as academic scholarships. So for students that really want to really delve into the early intervention field, or maybe they want to take classes related to early intervention, we actually do have academic scholarships for students to get into early intervention training, subscriptions, travel, books, whatever they need, the scholarship can hopefully fund in order to expand the pipeline of providers who are giving adequate and qualified services to those deaf students. So we have so many more things that we offer. That was just a short snippet. We do have a Southern Center that serves both the South and the West regions. Families, professionals, medical providers in the South and West can communicate and engage with the South Center of Real. For the medical centers in the East and West, they can actually contact the main headquarters here at the Clare Center. And then hopefully we will be establishing the next 3 centers. By the end of this year, we'll have more information about the Western and the Eastern Center. So that's it for Real. I'm actually going to turn the floor over to Melissa now. Okay, well, thank you so much, Sarah. It's so much information. I'd love to hear all about it. So Declare really is a new program and very exciting program. You can see here on the slide, the logo is still in development, but it's Declare. So it's a combination of sign of declare, announce, and success. And really it stands for Deaf Children's Language Rights Everywhere. And it was founded with one goal: how to end language deprivation, be that intentional, environmental, proficiency, or developmental outcomes. I would say, it's 30, 40 years down the line. Our goal is not obtuse. We want to end the cycle of language deprivation, end language deprivation in its entirety. So really, it means that, we hold true. We care about every deaf child. It's just access. It's access that leads to thriving. And that's a basic human right. And that's what we focus on. And that's what we care about. That's what we mean by language access. So, for example, the deaf community, deaf culture, all of those things that are really deserved at birth. Okay. So let me explain a little bit about the origins of Declare, how we started, what it is as a program, and how it is different from Real and Beacon, as and what exactly we do in order to tie together with the other two branches. Declare is basically the mechanism of community activities, trainings. It's about coming together, engaging in information sharing. And it's really community led. It's not universities or institutions that are leading this, it's community led. Declare, along with NAD, serves the deaf community. You know, NAD is for you as the deaf community. Declare originally started as NAD every 2 years does their, strategic planning and they vote on it. And then they have to move forward and complying with that strategic plan and set up these actions. And I would say for about a 10-year span of time, language deprivation coincided with everything that was brought up during these strategic plans. For 10 years, there was deaf concern, there was recognition that this was happening, and we were becoming more aware because of such strong research that there's a cognitive development impact. And there's a biological demand that these infants have access to language in order to thrive. So now we have the scientific evidence and data, plus the community and culture values that just coincide and align with each other, that became a hot topic. All of this was a hot topic and the point of dialogue until 2022. Those priorities talked about ASL resources for deaf infants. And it was, what does that mean? You know, they don't have access to ASL at this time. So we formed a committee and I became a chair. Myself and Matt co-chaired this committee. And we identified, I would say, a lot of community activities, but they were siloed. Okay, you do this, you do this, you do this, but there was no collaboration, open communication. There was no, leveraging, supporting each other and sharing of resources and information. So it was spread thin and siloed. And it was, oh, wow, you do that. That's great. Oh, well, wait, you do that too? So we're tripling, doubling, quadrupling our workload. And after some discussion and some realization, we came to know that we just need to have a centralized hub for these community resources so that everyone could come together and we could discuss what each person is working on and share that information and resource. And that's kind of how we started. And I would say March now is 2025. So March of 2024, we actually got sponsored from Real because Real really does believe in this. And so we got funding, which led to different organizations being able to fly in and really have a strong roundtable discussion and info sharing session. And that's how we kind of came to be. It was an agreement that it was communities and organizations coming together to do information sharing and resource sharing. And that is the intent of Declare. Now, again, we've proposed to NAD as a priority for 24 through 26, and that was voted upon and passed to move forward with Declare. And as co-chair, Matt is still involved. But Malibu Barron is actually now the co-chair working with me, coordinating all of this. And that's a little bit of the background for Declare. So let me go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, so yes, this was a recent picture from our first March gathering. Back in, yeah, go ahead into the next slide. So I'm so sorry, this is actually very small print on your screen right now, but these are the multitude of organizations that came together. Some had 2 to 3 people representing that organization, but I would say almost every deaf organization was, each of them had their own perspective, ideas, experiences regarding language deprivation. The BIPOC led organizations to more family led organizations, to institutional led organizations. So a large variety, all talking about this one topic and all highly motivated and really full-heartedly caring about this topic. What's interesting is that it had to be deaf-centric, right? It had to be deaf-led to make that movement going forward strong. Of course, we bring in our allies. We want our allies to align with us, but we want it to be the consideration of deaf community, deaf values, deaf-led movement with the support of allies, without the obligation of too much compromise. And the harm of language deprivation has reached its end. Like, it's been enough. And so we are coming back to the root of the problem in order to resolve it. But that slide there was an example of the organizations that came together. Now, I do not really have time to delve into all of this, but we did have a lot of dialogue. And a few things came to light during our discussions. We identified what are some of our assets, what strengths do we have? And I would say that the community itself has a very strong network. But we did notice that there were some gaps in funding, various areas, gaps in a strong representation at, decision-making levels in certain entities. And so looking at those assets and those gaps, and we just were able to build a framework of how we see this moving forward. So we were able to develop a roadmap of sorts in order to really roll up our sleeves and get into the deep of it and end language deprivation with more action than just ongoing discussion about it. I think it is critical to discuss it, but if discussion is all we have, then movement and change is rare. So we have to make sure that our community has wins. It's not just words, because again, we're going to run out of breath eventually. We have to take action. We have to break that mold, so to speak, and grow from there. So we've identified in this circle, this chart, we have to think about what's going to have an impact. So for example, medicine, the medical side of things, wow, it impacts so much. It's the what, the how to access, and it really does create movement. Gathering together, like coming together and aligning with each other. Where are the communities of BIPOC? Where is their say? Everything is ASL, but there's also other sign languages out there. There's also other languages that the deaf community uses and accesses. So we have to broaden that framework, broaden that perspective, and be able to come together and push just the ability to access language. Of course, social media in itself, it's hard to really capture, I guess, the family. At times it can be limited to just sign language interpreters. And there are deaf stories out there. So the media needs to shift and focus more about those deaf stories. And then lead K, I would say politically, legislatively, you have lead K, you have declare, but I think it's a strategic alignment of these organizations. Lead K work is very important. We want to make sure that we here at Declare and other organizations really back that movement. That way it becomes a collective. It becomes a collective and a support network for each organization. So that's sort of the framework that we have at Declare. In summary, I'll just let you read this slide. So again, it's, developing that connection, that network in order to make the greatest impact possible. I don't know who here is fast readers or not, but this slide is powerful. The power in connection, the power in movement, building communities, the power in having that to be able to push for change. It's not just having hope of change. It's not just discussion of change, but it's how to build our collective's power. And that's strategic work. So, how we do what we do, and then how we can build on to bringing others in that align and having just that strong front as we make this push. It just helps us to take a strong stance for a human rights crisis that's occurring. Now, the solution is there. We have the answer. We just need to implement the solutions. We need to get those resources, that knowledge, all of this together. It is rich. It is rich. We just need to make sure that it gets disseminated to the families, to the medical professionals, and so forth. We have work ahead of us, but this is the overall vision. We really have to emphasize and highlight the deaf experience. It is so vast in its variety. Yes, there's sign language, and that is sort of our uniting front there, but how life is navigated within deaf families, hearing families with deaf individuals, deaf schools versus mainstream, the pathways of life's journey of deaf individuals is so varied. A deaf person is always going to be deaf. They're on that journey, but the path that they take is going to vary. And again, I think it's having that opportunity to dream, to be who they want to be. And that opportunity should happen from day one at birth. That is where that opportunity and that ability to have that dream, to be who they want to be, comes into play. It starts there. And I think we need to make sure that we respect and care about all of the different choices that will be made. This slide is diverging a little bit, but it will come back, I promise. The Declare movement. Okay, let me explain a little bit more about why and what my work has been to this point, and what led me to this particular slide. So as I mentioned earlier, I was the founder of Motion Light Lab at Gallaudet University. The Motion Light Lab is part of the Visual Language Visual Learning, VL2. And I have been a part of that for 15 years, I would say. So I have, gone into the deep end, come back out and delved back in, all about visual language and language acquisition and cognitive language abilities. And through all of that experience over the years, I've seen how important it is to really carry this research and this information into the community. It's not just about publishing scientific literature. It is about becoming living experiences. And so we wanted to create a lab that really was innovative and founded in the research that's there, but bring it into the community in a way that really is accessible and has an impact. And I'm sure some of your schools, hopefully you have the storytelling apps, the training labs. I think California, Fremont, Wisconsin, and Texas. They have done wonderful storytelling apps and programs. And with Reel, with the bilingual bookshelf app, all of these apps really are there in one bookshelf app. And seeing that is incredible. I do want to mention just one last thing before I kind of start transitioning it, off of this. But we did receive a large grant from the Lego Foundation, and that grant was to build a play-based room for families. So I'm sure you know those families of, they have their infant and then they find out that their infant is part of the deaf community is deaf. And at first they feel disappointed. They feel like it's a negative thing, like there was something wrong. And so it was, where's the joy? The joy was completely absent. And I think this right now brings that joy back into it for these families. It's visual communication, visual activities, which then leads to a more openness and willingness for sign. And we've been running this lab for about 2 years now. And in the fall, we will release the first, we'll release it to the first 80 or 90 families. And hopefully we'll just see it, snowball from there and just have it really expand out. So I'm excited about that coming to play. I think that's it for me. Yes. Yeah. Last slide. Is there anything you wanted to add, Sarah?
Well, I think that, recognizing the description of each of these organizations, each center, each team, each organization, they are truly committed to ending language deprivation. They are committed to supporting the community. They are committed to enriching the systems that are out there through a variety of approaches, but really being able to align and synchronize all of this as one and strengthen our ecosystem through resources, community activism. We all have the same goal. So it's really nice to see this community activism and working together towards the same goal, utilizing different strategies to make different impacts across these systematic barriers, these language barriers. It is just such a great movement on all fronts.